I see a picture of us all sitting under a dogwood tree, and there you are seated beside us, telling us a story about love and how to live and how to treat one another, Almighty God. Sitting there uncondemned and full of love and compassion for one another, Almighty God, as you feed us the manna from heaven, the same food that the angels eat, Almighty God. We ask you to fill this place with your smoke from your power, and let your train fill this place. Let us keep you lifted up, Almighty God. Let us keep our eyes on you so that we do not fall, Almighty God. I ask you to be with Brother Shane as he brings the word. Let our hearts be attentive to your word and listen closely, because you are speaking, Almighty God.
That's right.
So we thank you for this morning, Almighty God, that you woke us up and you brought us on our way. We're all sitting here uncondemned, in a right mind, looking for answers to our questions. And we thank you for helping us to, teach us to be content in certain situations, because things happen. You cause things to happen, things happen. No matter what, you're still in control. You've allowed it. We thank you, and we love you. And bless the word to remind you to our hearts this morning as we listen. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
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 God is good, isn't it?
Amen.
Thank you, see you this morning. Give God. Amen. Last week I was standing in the kitchen, staring into the fridge, when I found a plastic bag full of ham. It was left over from Easter Sunday, and I wasn't at my mother's, I wasn't at my mother-in-law's, I wasn't even sitting down at the table with my family. So I decided to just dig in and just grab a big hunk right out of the bag and eat it like a man. Some of you would say a caveman, but whatever. I just ripped off a big piece of that ham, and I started to chew on it when I looked at it. That ham, by the way, didn't have mustard. I like mustard on it. It was cold, no mustard, but it was everything that I dreamed it would be. By the way, I'm chewing on it, and I looked down, and my son's 8-pound rodent of a dog was looking up at me like he hadn't eaten in several days. And I could hear Sarah McLachlan, like singing in the background, in the arms of the, how they, never mind. But I could hear her singing, and honestly, for the first time in the 2 years that we've had that dog, I began to feel something for him, something right here, and it wasn't much, I admit, and it certainly wasn't love. I promise you, it could have been heartburn, it could have been acid reflux, I don't know, but I looked at that dog as I was chewing on that ham, and I started to feel something for that dog. So I took a little piece of the ham, and I just threw it in his direction on the floor, and nothing happened. And he didn't see it, he didn't hear it hit the floor, he didn't even smell that piece of ham, and I'm thinking this makes no sense. So I tried to help the dog a little bit, and I just took my hand and I'm like, man, it is right there. It's on your right. Like he knows the difference between his right or his left. I'm like, it's 2 feet from your face, and he didn't move. I looked back at him, and he was not staring at me. You know what he was staring at? He was staring at my hand. Specifically, the hand that was holding that huge chunk of ham in it. And it dawned on me, I want you to get this great spiritual truth. It dawned on me, he didn't notice what I was pointing at because he was distracted by what I was pointing with. He didn't notice what I was pointing at because he was distracted by what I was pointing with. And the first thing that went into my mind is this dog is dumber than a bag of kibbles and bits. That's the first thing that I was thinking. The second thing that crossed my mind is it's probably not the smartest thing in the world to hold a huge hunk of ham in your hand and point to the tiny piece that you put on the floor for him. Not the smartest thing in the world. The dog didn't notice what I was pointing at because he was distracted by what I was pointing with. And as crazy, as absurd as it sounds this morning, the church is currently experiencing something very similar today. Jesus said, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto me. It is our job. It is our responsibility. It is our great opportunity to lift up the name that is above every name, the name that we just sang about for 3 our privilege this morning and for the remainder of our lives to point people to Jesus. That's what we're here for. Unfortunately, so much dust and dirt and debris has accumulated on the church for the last 2,000 years that people see the church, but they don't see Jesus. They see what we are pointing with, but they do not see who we are pointing towards. The point of this series for 5 weeks is for us to decrease and for Jesus to increase. The point of this series is less of us and more of Jesus. The point of this series is for one name to rise above the rubble of this broken religious system and for people to get a glimpse of who Jesus is. There's no hidden agendas, no politics, no condemnation, no judgment, just Jesus for 5 weeks. And I'm excited about what God has done in my heart and what He's going to do in this church as we talk about, as we lift up just Jesus. I've taken 5 stories. Some Jesus is at the center of, and some Jesus is at the perimeter of. Before I finish telling each one of them in 5 weeks, hopefully we see a clear picture of who Jesus is. The first one we find in Luke chapter 7, and I want you to turn to Luke 7 this morning if you've got the Word of God with you. If not, we've got it on the screen for you. But Luke chapter 7, and I want to just spend a little bit of time, actually the remainder of my time this morning, in just a few verses here in Luke chapter 7. My first point this morning is an uninvited guest. An uninvited guest. Our story is taken out of one of the most compelling, one of the most memorable, one of the most meaningful stories that takes place very early on in the ministry of Jesus' 3.5-year ministry. It's hard to imagine. He lived for 33 years. It's hard to imagine that he didn't even begin his earthly ministry until he was baptized by John at 30 years of age. This story in particular takes place very early on in his ministry. Even though it was early on, word was beginning to spread like wildfire about the signs, the wonders, the miracles that this God-man was performing. They say that all attention is not necessarily good attention. He was getting a lot of attention, and while the masses were singing his praises, the religious elite were looking for a way to either, one, expose him for being a fraud, or two, exploit him for being the real thing. Simon, one of the religious leaders, he was a Pharisee, and his philosophy was to keep your friends close and to keep your enemies closer. So this Pharisee begins to hear more than he wants to hear about this Jesus character. So he invites him over to his house for lunch. Let's read verse number 36 as we move through this story slowly but deliberately this morning. Verse number 36. And one of the Pharisees desired him that he would eat with him, and he went into the Pharisee's house and sat down to meat. Jesus didn't have any problem. We're not sure of the motives. I think we're aware of the motives of the Pharisee, but he invites Jesus over for a meal, and Jesus was no, as we'll see, respecter of persons. So he's like, if I've been invited for a meal, then I'm going to show up to the meal. At best, I think this Pharisee wanted some type of merger between the old system and the new system. At worst, I believe he wanted to eliminate the new system so they could maintain the old system and he could continue in his current position. Either way, I want you to get the picture. The table's set. And on one side of the table, there is a leader of a religion that is supposed to be bringing men to God. And on the other side of the table, there is God himself who has come down to men. And as if the meeting couldn't get any more intense, there was an uninvited guest that showed up. Have you ever showed up to something that you weren't invited to? Showed up to something that you weren't supposed to be at? I remember I went to an event on the campus of Wesley College I think it was 18, 19 years old. And the good news is I had a friend who was a freshman there that asked me to show up to this event. The bad news is about halfway through the event, I found out that he didn't have the authority to invite me, and it was an event that was exclusively for people who had enrolled at Wesley. Man, I just felt terrible. I felt like I was in trouble the whole evening. I felt like at any moment I'm going to get kicked out of a college that I had never even enrolled in. It was awkward. It was uncomfortable, attending something that you're really not wanted or invited to. As unpleasant as that evening is in my memory, I can't imagine what was racing through the heart, what was raging in the mind of the woman in this story. Let's look at the next verse in the story, verse number 37. The Bible says, "And behold, a woman in the city, which was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at meat at the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment." There's two clues woven into verse number 37 in the least graphic way possible that give us a little bit of evidence as to the profession this woman had chosen to make a profit from. The first one says that she's a woman in the city. The second says that she was a sinner. When Luke says that she was a sinner, he wasn't saying it in the general sense like all of us have sinned and come short or fallen short of the glory of God. He was saying it in a very specific way, trying to be subtle but also specific. Historians and Bible scholars agree almost unanimously that this woman was a prostitute. I want you to get the picture. I've already told you about the two men who were sitting on opposing sides of the table, but now I want you to think about this woman. This woman's life was a life where she wouldn't typically be invited to parties like this. Men without morals were used to talking to her and touching her like she was a piece of property. Women no doubt whispered things intentionally, just loud enough so they could hear, so she could hear what they were saying about her. I'm sure mothers tried to keep their children away from her corner, tried to keep their children from even staring at her, possibly the way that she had clothed herself. This woman had a name. She had a reputation. She had been in a lot of places. She had been with a lot of people, but I bet you this morning that she had never been invited to lunch at a religious leader's house in the middle of the day. She was not invited. She was not expected, and she was not wanted. And yet this woman, as Luke said, this woman of the city, this uninvited guest showed up that day, and in her trembling hands, she's holding an alabaster box filled with ointment. I want to move on in our story. As we race towards Christ, as we move closer to the cross from an uninvited guest, I want to talk about an unexpected gesture. Jewish culture has a much different view of hospitality than we do. Their meals are a lot more like public events than private events. They would actually leave the door open to the dining room, and in the dining room there would be a table, and then around the perimeter of the room there would be chairs or open spots for places for people to sit. So the people who are invited were expected to move through the dining room doors and sit at the table or recline at the table. Their tables were similar to the tables in the Orient, the Middle East. They're very low, and they wouldn't sit in chairs similar to the ones that you're sitting in this morning. They would actually recline. Their feet would often be underneath them or kind of behind them as they rested one elbow on the table and ate or drank with the other arm. It would be uncomfortable for us to sit the way that they do after being accustomed to the way that we do, but their culture was so much different. The invited guests would sit at the table, and then people, believe it or not, who were just passing by, who maybe wanted to take a break, or maybe wanted a bite to eat, or maybe were interested in the content of the conversation that they could just slip in uninvited. And although they wouldn't sit at the table, they were allowed and encouraged to sit around the perimeter of the room to listen in and even get involved in the conversation. So anyone just passing by was welcome to come in for lunch. Can you imagine that in our culture? We wouldn't think of walking up to a stranger's door, knocking on it and saying, hey, what's for lunch? What are we eating for dinner tonight? We wouldn't think of knocking on a stranger's door and saying, hey, what are we talking about? What are we discussing? What are we arguing about tonight? Their culture was very different. So it wasn't unusual for someone to slip in uninvited and take a seat. What was unusual about this story is the person who slipped in. The perceived disparity between the religious elite and this woman, as Luke says, of the street. And if her presence wasn't awkward enough, what she proceeded to do was absurd. I tried to think of the most absurd thing that I've ever seen or heard in a serious setting, and this is terrible. Some of you guys are going to get offended about this, but it popped in my head. It was the second funeral that I've ever done. A man passed away, and the family asked me to preside over the ceremony. And I remember they wanted a few family members to say things, and a family member would get up and share a moment, a memory, some story. And I remember this one lady when she stood up. She was very confident, but when she walked forward towards the microphone, you could hear the gasp and the groans in the room. And I'm thinking to myself, this is not heading the right direction. There's this tension in the room that I hadn't felt up to that point. And she stood behind the microphone and she was very confident, and she said, some of you may not know who I am. And then she pointed to the coffin and she said, I was his first wife. She said, I was the first woman that he ever loved. And the widow is on the front row, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm probably going to have to get security. This is not looking, they don't train you for that type of stuff at Bible college, but I'm thinking that is probably one of the most awkward or absurd things that I've really seen or heard in a serious setting. And as crazy as that sounds, I don't think it's close. I don't think it even holds a candle to what this woman is about to do at this meal. Let's look at verse number 38 together. And stood at his feet, this is the woman standing behind Jesus. Remember, he's in a reclining, a low, but a reclining type position. His feet are stretched out behind him. So as she stood at his feet behind him, weeping, and began to wash his feet with tears, and did wipe them with the hairs of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with ointment. I say this is an unexpected gesture, but this culture expected this type of hospitality. They just never expected it from this type of person. Let's read a little bit further. Verse number 44 through verse number 46. And he turned to the woman and said unto Simon, I love the way that Jesus navigates conversations. He turns around and looks at the woman, but he's still talking to Simon. He says, and said unto Simon the Pharisee, seest thou this woman? I entered into thine house. Thou gavest me no water for my feet, but she hath washed my feet with tears and wiped them with the hairs of her head. Thou gavest me no kiss. But this woman, since the time I came in, hath not ceased to kiss my feet. My head with oil thou didst not anoint, but this woman hath anointed my feet with ointment. I want to break this down to three different specific things that she did, and because they're relevant to the story, and they're relevant, believe it or not, to our lives, even though there's a gap between their culture and our culture. Verse number 44 through 46 talks about a kiss, talks about oil, and it talks about a foot washing. The kiss in their culture was the equivalent of a handshake in our culture. I would place my right hand on your left shoulder and kiss your right cheek. I place my left hand on your right shoulder and kiss your left cheek. I preached this last night in Elkton and asked for volunteers so I could demonstrate how that was done. Believe it or not, no one volunteered at all. But the kiss was significant, and although we would consider it strange, it was the equivalent of a handshake in our culture. And what you were saying is that essentially we are socially equals, or we are friends. We have a common bond. Even if we were strangers, there is a friendship between us because of that kiss. The second thing is the oil. The oil was a little bit deeper than friendship. It was a sign, it was a symbol of reverence. Practically, they lived in a very arid climate. The temperatures would climb during the day and they would plummet during the night, and because of the dust and the limestone that was pervasive in that area, it would be driven by the wind and it would be brutal on the skin. So they would apply this oil to the exposed areas of a person's body, and it would just help out greatly with the skin. That's the practical reason for the anointing of the oil. The spiritual or the symbolic reason was when I put oil on a person or on an object, I am sanctifying, I am setting that person apart, saying there is something special or there is something unique or there is something sacred. That's why they anointed, not just for the practical, but symbolically saying I am showing reverence and respect, not just friendship, but reverence to this person. The third thing is the foot washing. They would wash each other's feet, and it had a practical reason. Man, they walked for miles in their culture. We get frustrated if we don't get a close parking spot. I know people don't do that at church, but in some places, believe it or not, they get bothered if they have to walk a distance. And these people would walk for miles, so do the math. They walked for miles. It's an arid, it's a hot climate. They wore sandals, sweaty feet, dusty roads, and a person's going to come in and not sit in a chair like we have this morning, but they're going to sit down on a piece of upholstered furniture. They're going to sit down on a piece of fabric, and their feet aren't going to be on the floor. They're going to be on the fabric itself. So very practically, they would wash the feet like almost we wash our hands before a meal, because they don't want the feet every day, every meal on the fabric. That's the practical reason. Symbolically, believe it or not, when somebody was a guest, even if they're uninvited, even if I'm not aware, the Jewish people showed such hospitality. They were actually expected up to 3 days to show hospitality. When they would wash somebody's feet, they were saying this, and I need you to get this. Even though you are a guest in my house, I am going to treat you like you are the head of this house, and I am going to serve you for the remainder of your stay at this house. Up to 3 days, I am going to serve you as if you're the head of the house. So the kiss is for friendship. The oil is for reverence, and the foot washing is saying, I'm here to serve you. And what we just read out of 44 through 46, here's what Jesus was saying to this religious leader. He said, when I showed up, you did not kiss me, letting me know you do not look at me like I'm a friend. He said, you did not anoint me with oil, which lets me know you do not have any reverence or respect for who I am. You did not wash my feet. You let me know from the gate that you were not in any way inviting me here to serve me or planning on doing anything for me. But I think about the woman on the other hand. When she noticed that Jesus was overlooked, when she noticed that Jesus was being ignored in the very place that he was invited, which is a completely different message for the church today. If you remember in Revelation, Jesus says, behold, I stand at the door, and he was not standing on the outside of an unrepentant person's heart. He was standing on the outside of his own church. And people were still meeting, and they were still speaking, and they were still singing, but the very one that they were there together had not even been invited or recognized. When this woman recognized that Jesus was being ignored in the very place that he was invited, she sat at his feet. And the tears that formed in her eyes, and the tears that fell from her face, the tears that soaked the floor in Simon's house, carried with them the broken dreams of a little girl and the dust that had gathered on the feet of the God who had come to make all things new. And then she took her hair, the highest and the most glorious thing about her, and began to wash his feet, the lowest and the most humble part about him. Simon, this Pharisee, this self-righteous person who spent his days in the court of the temple, couldn't figure out why he couldn't stop staring at this woman who spent her evenings on the street. An uninvited guest that day showed an unexpected gesture. And I want to close with my third and the final point this morning, and it's an unbelievable gift. You see, the story is really not about a Pharisee, and the story As amazing as her story is, it's not about this woman. It's really about Jesus. The story, as beautiful as it is, has found itself at the center of controversy. We have to argue about everything, don't we? We have to divide over everything. And over time, as simple and as beautiful as this story is, people have felt the need to pick sides. And I want to show you the two sides, and then I want to give you the truth before I let you go this morning. They debate about this story. People divide over this story. So I want to take a minute, if I can, to patch up the rift that religion has given us. And I want to preach about the gift that God has given us. Let's look at verse number 47. This is the line that divides. Verse number 47. And truth, by the way, does not divide. It simply reveals the division that already exists. Verse number 47. So when people speak the truth, they are not being divisive. They are revealing the division that already exists in our culture. If this pulpit is split in half and the lights were off, nobody would see the division. But if I shine a light on it, you would see the division. So when we preach the truth, we are not being divisive. We are simply revealing the division that already exists. Verse number 47. Wherefore I say unto thee, her sins, which are many, are forgiven. For she loved much, but to whom little is forgiven, the same loveth much. There's a phrase in the middle of this verse that it seems to cause problems. It says, her sins, which are many, are forgiven. And then it says, for she loved much. Now it seems to say that her sins are forgiven because she loved much, and her love earned somehow or paid somehow for the forgiveness of her sins. And this is what certain people assert about this verse. They're saying, hey, because of this demonstration of love and affection, this ointment that was no doubt valuable that she poured out, she somehow touched the heart of Jesus to the place where he's like, you know what? I'm going to forgive you of your sins. But here's the $1 million question. Did she love Jesus in an attempt to be forgiven? Or did she love Jesus because she was already forgiven? Did she love Jesus attempting to win forgiveness? Or did she pour out this love on Jesus because she was already forgiven, possibly before she even showed up to Simon's house this day? The question is this: is forgiveness a product that needs to be purchased, or is it a gift that must be received? And that's something we need to wrestle with this morning. And honestly, our answers shouldn't come from religion. It shouldn't come from what some preacher or pastor has said. I've encouraged many times for you not to take my word for it, but to go to the Word of God for our answers. This Word of God is our sole authority for faith and practice.
That's right.
So when I ask, is it a product that needs to be purchased, as it seems to indicate in 47, or is it a gift that is only received? We have to run to and cling to the Word of God for our answer. We find it in Ephesians 2, 8, and 9. The Bible says, for by grace are you saved through faith. And that not of yourselves, it is the gift. I don't know about you, but I'm not as deep as some of these scholars. It's very simple. I've never been given a gift and someone asked me to pay for it. I've been given gifts that had a receipt, but I've never been given a gift, shown the receipt and saying this is what it's going to cost you. Then it would not be a gift. Ephesians says, Paul says to the Ephesian elders, it is the gift of God. And then he punctuates this truth by saying, not of works, lest any man should boast. So it is a gift. If it wasn't a gift, let's apply the truth of Ephesians 2, 8, 9 to the context, to this woman's story. Let's say she leaves the house and she's been forgiven and she tells her friends, guess what? You're not going to believe it, but I'm forgiven. And her friends say, wow, how in the world did you obtain the forgiveness for what you've done? And what if she looked at her friends and said, well, I had to endure this humiliating public experience, and then I had to cry sincere tears And then I had to anoint Jesus and kiss his feet. And then I had to wash it all off with my hair. And after I had done all that, Jesus said, hey, you've done enough. Now you're forgiven. If that was the truth, then the attention and the glory would go to the person who is paying for the product, not the God that is giving a gift. The Bible says, but God commendeth his love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. The truth is that Jesus did not wait for this woman to come to him. He came to her. He came to seek, the Bible says, and to save that which was lost. So could she earn what she received that day? The truth is, a barrel filled with her tears, an ocean filled with her ointment, a lifetime filled with her affection couldn't come close to purchasing what Christ did on the cross for this woman and for you and for me. We live in a culture that's in love with 30-second sound bites. It could be a 30-minute speech by a preacher, a politician, anybody. And we don't care about the first 20 minutes. And we don't listen to the last 10 minutes. We are arrogant enough to believe that just 30 seconds in the middle is all we need to accurately ascertain everything about this person speaking and everything they believe. Scholars have spent a lot of time and energy on verse number 47, trying to break down how it was translated from the Greek to the English. And what they're doing is they're fixating on a soundbite and they're forgetting the story. The key that unlocks the understanding, our understanding of verse number 47 is actually given to us earlier in the story when Jesus tells Simon a very short parable. I want you to look at it with me. Verse number 41 and 42. It's the key that unlocks our understanding of verse number 47. Verse number 41. There was a certain creditor which had two debtors. The one owed 500 pence and the other 50. And when they had nothing to pay, he frankly forgave them both. Tell me therefore, which of them will love him most? We understand this, even though cultures change. There's always been creditors and there's always been debtors. So we get this. The amount of money is what we like to think about. One owed 555. We like to compare the debts that we owe when the real truth and the real significance in verse number 42 is given to us right at the beginning. I want you to look at it with me and I want you to remember. It says, and when they had nothing. Jesus kind of placated Simon a little bit. He kind of gave in because Simon was convinced that this woman owed a great deal and he owed very little. Jesus said, I'll go along and I'll write a story that's kind of in line with what you're thinking, but still proves that you're dead wrong. He says there's two people, one owed a lot, one owed very little. But in verse number 42, he puts them on the same level by saying neither one of them could pay anything. That's the truth when it comes to our state. That's the truth when it comes to Christianity. We have nothing to pay. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you have. It doesn't matter what your bank account says about you, your level of education that you've achieved. It doesn't matter how many good deeds that you've done, what you've accomplished in this life, from the woman on the street to the self-righteous Pharisee. All ground is level at the foot of the cross. There's not a person among us that possesses anything that they can even put towards the great debt that they owe God. Now I know this deals a death blow to our ego and our pride because there's something in all of us that wants to say, this is what I've done, this is what I can do. God, let me earn this in some way, but there's nothing that we can give. Forgiveness cannot be purchased. Forgiveness is a gift. And that's wonderful, but sometimes we miss the rest of Jesus, and this message is about just Jesus. Ephesians says that we're not saved by good works, but we're saved unto good works. Don't miss this. We're not saved by good works, but we're saved unto good works. So forgiveness cannot be purchased with good works, but good works should be produced in the life of the person who has been forgiven.
Amen.
Our good works cannot purchase forgiveness. But those good works should be evident and being produced in the life of the person who claims that they have been forgiven. So the level of love, and that's what this story is about, the level of love that I release is a direct indication of the level of forgiveness that I have received. So he looks at the Pharisee, he's actually looking at the woman still speaking to Simon, and he says, man, this woman has washed my feet. She has kissed my feet. She has shed tears. She has washed my feet with her hair. She's just poured out lavishly her love on me from the moment she saw me until now. Then he looks at Simon and he says, but you've given me no kiss. And you've not anointed me with oil, and you have not washed my feet. He's saying, your actions are an indication that you have not received the forgiveness of sins. I love this story. I love it because it exposes the great gulf that exists between the religion of man and a relationship with God. Let me give you just the differences real quick. Religion of man. Religion is selective. It's selective in who it invites. It's selective in who it allows to sit at the table. Religion shows partiality. Some people get to sit in the front row. Some people have to sit in the nosebleed. Some people are allowed to sit at the table, and some people are expected, if anything, just to sit and remain at the perimeter. Some people are anointed with oil. Some people just get the evil eye. Religion is selective. It will always show partiality, a relationship with God. And this is the beauty of it. Just Jesus. Everyone is invited. Everyone from the prostitute to the Pharisee and everyone in between. Every individual is invited to this meal that our God has prepared for us. He's not a respecter of persons. He does not show partiality. Everyone is invited, not to the perimeter, but to pull up a chair right to the table. Religion says you've got to earn your spot. You've got to pay to play. This seat is expensive, so they give you a list of things to do or a number of hoops to jump through, and when you're done, you end up looking a lot like them, but not very much like Jesus at all. Just Jesus says you've got nothing to give. That's the bad news. You got nothing to give. The good news is you've got nothing you owe. It's already been paid for in full by the God that has invited you to pull up to the table. Religion says once you're in, you can kind of go through the motions. Once you're on the inside, you can kind of go through the motions. Love is unnecessary. Emotions are overrated. But just Jesus says, once you've taken a seat at the table, once you realize the cost of that seat that you're sitting in, you will desire to recklessly pour out your affection and your obedience on the one who has purchased that seat for you. That is just Jesus. Yes, he accepts us. But at the same time, he expects us, after we pull up to that table, to never look the same. Tragically, the church and religion has done an effective job at covering up Christ. The world sees what we are pointing with, but they do not see who we are pointing to. The world sees the church. They see our buildings. They are vaguely aware of our budgets. They know that churches dot the landscape of our land. They see the church, but my question is in this series, do they see Jesus? I first wrote this, I came to the wrong conclusion. I felt like we should be like Jesus. And I wouldn't argue with you if that's what you would claim, because we should be like Jesus. But for this world to see Jesus, we have a choice to make. We have a question to ask and a decision to make. Do we treat it more like religion, or a relationship. If we were to evaluate our lives and the way that we approach the Christian life, the way that we approach church, our Bible study, our prayer life, our worship, if we were to evaluate it, let me ask you a question that I just want you to consider in closing. Would we resemble Simon? Or would we look more like this woman? Are we checking off the boxes? Are we going through the motions? Are we trying to maintain an outward appearance of Christianity? Or are we completely unconcerned with what other people think of us because we are so focused on the friendship that we have with Jesus?
Amen.
So focused on anointing him by saying, you are special to me. You are sacred. I am reverencing you with my life. Are we so fixated on Jesus by washing his feet, by saying, you are my master. Yes, I've invited you into my life. Yes, I'm sitting with you at the table, but you are the Lord of my life. You are the master of my life. I am here to serve you. Do our lives, in an attempt to say just Jesus, do our lives look more like Simon's, maintaining that appearance? Or do they look more like this woman who obviously is not concerned what other people think of the way that she worships her Lord? So overwhelmed with the forgiveness she's received, the friendship that she has, that she's planning on spending the rest of her life pouring out recklessly her affection and her obedience on the God that forgave her. And my prayer for my life and my prayer for your life, my prayer for this church is that when other people see us, they see just Jesus.
Amen.
Just Jesus. Let's close in a word of prayer.